Welcome to Legacy Sips and Tips podcast with your geeky host, Lindsay Wheeler, where we talk about everything from death, preparing for your future through estate planning, life, the occasional breakup, entrepreneurship, general nerdery, and of course travel, snowboard, and always wine. Welcome to Legacy Sips and Tips with your host, Lindsay, and today we're going to talk about cats, and actually we're going to talk about legal jargon in estate planning. So when you get into estate planning, there are certain terms that you need to know. Either whether because you're just becoming educated, whether you're going to go have to talk to an attorney or you're going to do it yourself, you should have some basic knowledge of what these things actually mean, because there's actually a language in the legal system and it's called legalese. It's just like a foreign language in a foreign country. I am a practitioner, so I am your tour guide and I speak that language. Your attorney that you speak to or a practitioner should also be a tour guide and know exactly what these things mean and to be able to simply explain them and what those terms mean so you also now can understand what those mean. If an attorney talks over your head, does not stop, does not slow down, does not tell you what these things actually mean in real people terms, maybe run screaming from that building. So we're going to go over just some terms so you guys are familiar with it. Have that basic education so you feel confident to speak with a practitioner or to understand these legal documents on your own. Let's go over what some basic terms of estate planning are so you have a working knowledge. The first one, of course, is trustor. Also, you'll refer to it or hear it referred to as a settlor or grantor. Anything with the OR is usually meaning somebody's doing something or creating something. So a trustor, settlor, grantor is you, typically, the person creating the trust. That's all that is. That's all that means. Weird, I know. The other term that goes along with that is trustee, settlor, or grantee. That's something is happening to them, if you will. So you are also typically that role. Of course, you can have somebody else be the trustee who's going to manage the trust, but typically that is you. So again, you're a trustor creating the trust, and then your trustee is going to initially manage the trust. They're the ones doing the managerial role of those assets or that estate. With that, of course, if that person's not available, we have what we call a successor trustee. That's your backup manager. That's who's going to step in when that initial trustee, typically you, is either not able to or is no longer with us to manage those assets or manage that estate. That's your successor trustee. So those are the basic people roles that happen in an estate plan and in your revocable living trust. With that, we have additional roles called an agent. That is with a power of attorney, typically is where we hear that. That is the person who is stepping into your shoes while you're alive, again, but unable to make those decisions for yourself, either financially or medically. They're called our agent. They're our power of attorney agent who is going to do that for you. We also have alternate agents or secondary alternate agents within that power of attorney document. So of course, when powers of attorney live when we die, they die with us. So always keep that in mind. Another term you might hear with a will is executor or executrix. That is the person who is going to manage your will or go through the probate process for you. That is the person you have nominated or has listed to be your will manager or your probate person, essentially. Another one we hear is decedent. That's you when you die. That's a dead person. That's what we call as a decedent, if you will. And that person can die two different ways. Intestate, which means with nothing in place. You have fairly neglected to do everything. You have nothing in place, no estate plan, no will, no directives, what have you. That's called you have died intestate with nothing. If you die testate, that means you have done some work at least. You have a will or you have an estate plan in place. You have died testate because now you have actual documents in place to direct either the probate court or your successor trustees through your estate. A term you'll hear in estate planning is inter vivos, or you have an inter vivos estate plan. That's the same thing as your living trust. It's you during your lifetime creating this. Another good term is issue. That's your children, your kids. They're called your issue. There also could be called your heirs as well. They can be your heirs by right of representation. That means that they're your children naturally, usually either born or adopted legally to you. That's your issue, if you will. They can also be your beneficiary, which is the person who receives your estate. That necessarily may not be your kids, because if your kids suck or you don't like them or you need to not have them in there because you haven't talked to them in 15 years, then we're going to cut out those issues of you, and we can put different beneficiaries in there. The beneficiary is just who's going to receive your stuff through that designation in your either trust, estate plan, or through your will. Those can also be charities. They could be individual people that are not related to you. They could be your pets. They could be institutions, if you will. That's just who's going to receive your things. That's the benefit. They're a beneficiary of your estate. You might have heard the word lapse. That is if, so say that gift may lapse, so maybe a certain provision has not happened, and so that gift will now become void and it lapses, if you will, and gets put back into the estate. It could be maybe someone's passed away. So if that person's not with us, then that gift may lapse for that individual person. Say we wanted to give Bob $10,000 as a one-time gift through our estate plan, right? Well, if Bob's no longer with us, that gift will lapse and then revert back into the full estate at that point. So a term that you might hear is per stirpes. All that really usually means is your lineal descent. What that means is that your heirs or your children or that lineal descent, or if you don't have children, then maybe your siblings, your cousins, or your parents. It is how we determine where your stuff goes. So it can be a very generic term that you would put as your distribution, that you devise your estate to your children per stirpes. So if they're not available, it would go to their children, and if their children are not available, to their children if they're born and alive. That's why it's kind of a catch-all in a sense of instead of usually putting, so sometimes we'll put, I would like my estate to go equally between Bob and Sally Smith, my children, right? If Bob or Sally were to predecease, their share shall go to their children by right of representation. That means they're naturally born or adopted children. If they're not available, maybe they don't have children, it'll wrap them to the remainder of the two. So at least it's going somewhere down the line. So if their first option's not there, maybe we have a second option. And if that second option's not available, we have a third. The way that attorneys oftentimes will just kind of encapsulate that descent, if you will, is by the term per stirpes. That means your lineal descent down the line. That's all that really means. You guys can find all this information as well online in my handy dandy guide called Introduction to Your Estate Plan. And I'll put this in the show notes so you guys can download it and take a look at it. Also our workbooks there for estate planning and helping you get those difficult questions out of the way that you may not know you need to even ask for getting your estate plan in place. So here's our handy dandy little workbook here and information packet. Again, not legal advice, just information for you guys to look at. So let me read one that's important here, and you'll hear this, maybe it's called a Q-tip. So that means it's a qualified terminable interest property. It is a type of interest in property passed from one spouse to the other, which qualifies for an estate tax marital deduction only if, 1, the surviving spouse will receive the income from the property payable at least annually for the duration of his or her life, and 2, no person has the power to appoint the property to anyone other than the surviving spouse. This is very typical in a marital trust, if you will, that we have that kind of built in, or we'll mention that because we want that marital deduction, because we want that inheritance tax transferring if that is applicable. And that is basically saying that the trust is for your guys' benefit, maintenance, welfare together. When one of you passes away, the trust is typically for the benefit, maintenance, welfare of the remaining spouse. That's what that means. Any kind of tax implications, we're going to have that Q-tip deduction taken in place because it's for the remaining spouse's benefit. And then when both of them pass away, again, of course, that trust will then lock down, become irrevocable, because we don't want people changing wishes. And then distribution will happen accordingly from there. And those then tax or state tax will come applicable at that point. So oftentimes you can have a spendthrift trust, or you can have a spendthrift clause within your estate plan. And that is a fun one. I call it the ability for people that you have listed as a beneficiary to not use that beneficiary designation as collateral for a debt. That's basically saying that, little Jimmy can't say, hey, I'm a beneficiary on my parents' estate. I'm going to go ahead and use that beneficiary designation as a collateral for a boat I'm going to go buy, if you will. That is saying that that can't happen. That's the spendthrift provision, which is kind of a fun one as well. We also have a super important one called the no contest clause. That should usually be included in everything that you do, whether it's an estate plan, a trust, a will, written down, whatever it is. That's the greedy clause. That's I call the Caddyshack clause, you'll get nothing and like it. So what that says is that within your documents, if you say Bob and Sally are going to have this estate equally, they're going to share this equally as their beneficiaries, right? Say Bob is like, you know what, I was really there for our parents. Sally, you really didn't do anything. I want 95% of the trust now. I want 95% of everything because I really stepped up and did more work. If that's not written in the actual documents that the trustor has created, guess what now? Bob gets nothing because he wants to be a greedy bastard. And the courts are pretty strict about those. Unless there's, fraud, duress, incapacity, you would do a contest on that to show those things, which is pretty difficult, frankly, to show a court, that that person was not able to make that distribution or that with their wishes with a sound body and mind, if you will. So the no contest clause is a very nice one to have in there, is that basically if you want to be greedy, now you get nothing. And the courts, like I said, are pretty strict on those, that they don't want people being greedy, frankly. So that's called a no contest clause that should be included in your estate plan. Today's wine is a wonderful wine from the land of Portugal. So fun story is my friends were stationed over in Portugal. Her husband's in the military and they were over there for 3 years, which made me very happy because Portugal has bitchin' wine. They have an amazing wine region with amazing wines. They have beautiful red wines like this one here. This is a Palmela 2018. It is a Vinho Tinto red wine, if you will. Portugal is also known for, in most of Europe, but particularly Portugal, is they have a thing called green wine, and it is awesome. It's a young wine, is what they're saying. It's a white wine. And in Portugal, they will offer you options at restaurants or, bars or wherever you go to for their wine. You can order a house wine, which is always going to be good, frankly. It's going to be inexpensive for you, and they will offer you size options, if you will. You could buy a glass of wine if you want to for a couple bucks. Or you can get an entire carafe of wine for yourself for just a little bit more. I don't know how many is in that, because after you have a carafe of wine, you kind of forget to count how much you've been drinking at that point, and then you just stumble on to the next cool historic thing or museum or tour or restaurant or bar, or whatever you're doing in that city. Maybe you're in Lisbon, maybe you're in Porto, I don't know. But in Portugal, they offer you personal carafes of wine, and that's why Portugal is an amazing place for wine drinking. Another one is a subscribing witness. This is typically, we see these in our wills, and those are, like we talk about, when you have a will, almost in all states, you need to have 2 witnesses witness you signing your will and your last testament and your wishes. So a subscribing witness is exactly that. They are subscribing that they have seen you, that they feel that you are of sound body and mind, that you are able to now know that you are creating your will, and they are witnessing your signature. So that's an important one, having those subscribing witnesses. And why we have 2 witnesses is because that's called that double attestation clause, is that first witness is witnessing you sign, and that second witness is witnessing the witness you. So that's how that makes that valid, making sure, of course, always when you do sign that they have their full name, their full address on there, and double check, of course, with the state requirements for what the requirements of an actual valid will are. A lot of states are moving into electronic wills and electronic signing. Nevada is one of those that we can have electronic witnesses. California is one of those states that requires still in-person signings. So always double check on that. This one is very important about getting things signed. Hi. She's all up in the business today. I don't know why. She is very needy today. She wants to be part of this podcast, and so we just have to do what kitties wish. Also, she's on my lap, and so you know the rule that if a cat sits on your lap, that you're not able to move or leave until either the cat gets off your lap or you die. Everyone in the room should be fully aware that if a cat is on your lap, that they are required to bring you items that you may need. Do you need a beverage? Do you need sustenance? Do you need a sandwich? What do you need? As long as the cat is on the lap, you are not allowed to move the cat. It is at the cat's will, and like I said, either the cat moves or leaves or you die. Those are the rules. I don't make them up, people. I don't make them up. These are the rules. Let's also talk about the rule against perpetuities. You guys may have heard that. Where almost nobody knows what this means. Even through law school, nobody knows what this means. The cat doesn't know what that means. However, where this came into place, which was super awesome, is, I don't care what your political affiliation is, this is just awesomeness, is when DeSantis in Florida tried to challenge the Disney Corporation. We all heard about that. Disney did some creative political maneuvering with their lawyers on that lease agreement for the Disneyland land. And what they did is they put a clause in there that said that the lease would not expire or when it would expire, is at the last monarch of England plus that 21 years, because it's a life and being plus 21 years. So the likelihood of there not ever being a monarch in England anymore is really, really low. But even after that, after 21 years, after that monarch has passed away, then the lease agreement on that land would expire. So during that time, all of us practitioners who have been to law school, who know about that or knew what the rule against perpetuities was like, high five. Whoever their lawyers were clever and creative on doing that, because nobody understands what the rule against perpetuities is. So you'll see that in estate planning. You'll see where it says rule against perpetuities. All that means is that we, at the creation of this document, have listed everybody that we know is going to be alive and being plus 21 years. So it's not like our grandchildren's grandchildren's grandchildren. People that may never exist, we don't put them in there because that doesn't make sense, right? Because they may never exist. However, we can put a life and being plus 21 years. That's the rule against perpetuities. Super weird, super nebulous, but nice creative legal maneuvering on Disney Corporation's standpoint on that. And all of us had some great memes on the socials for that week. We all, inside joke, laughed about it. So that's what that means when you hear that. Again, we got to have this going, because white cat, black fur. Everyone's getting a show of me doing this right now. Good times. God. You know, when you're Gothic and you deal in death a lot and you wear a lot of black clothes, I know we all love our animals, and you know, sometimes the cat distribution system just sends you the cats that you may not want but you need, and they may not be matching to your color scheme. Like mine, for instance. I have a little cow cat and she has a lot of white fur on her, and that white fur likes to get all over my black clothes. So also, people who own huskies fully understand what one of these is. Oh, husky babies, they like to just shed everywhere. So anywho, back to talking about estate planning, and not so much of our fur babies, but of course, and fur babies are included in our estate plan, so they all do kind of tie together. Domicile or situs. Situs? I can never say that right. It's basically where you live or where your house or property is situated. It's like a situational thing. It's a situs. I can never say it right. If you can tell me how to say that right, let me know. But what it basically means is where property is, its location, its place of being, if you will. That is the domicile of either that property or the person, or the situs of the property itself. Where people get kind of confused is that we talk about a certificate of trust or a trust agreement. So those are two separate documents. Our trust agreement is our rules, basically, of the estate, of how we follow everything, right? It has who you are as a trustor, you managing as trustee, who our successor trustee is going to be, what we're calling the trust, where is the trust going to go to our beneficiaries, our designations, or a distribution clause in there. It might have some private information, maybe our guardianship nominations in there if we have underage children. That's our trust agreement. It's the rule book of how everything's going to now be managed, that family business, if you will. The certificate of trust is the Reader's Digest version of that. It basically just is the abstract of trust is also what it's called. So if a financial institution asks for the abstract of trust, that's the same thing as your certificate of trust or vice versa. It is just showing that you have created a trust, who is the trustor, who's the trustee, who's going to manage that trust when you're not here, what's it called, and how they manage the trust. No private information, nothing crazy in there, nothing that anybody didn't need to see, basically. So it's usually typically around 2 or 3 pages, and that's, again, what the DMV will take a copy of. Your financial institutions, your bank, your broker, your investments, the recorder for your property will gonna want to see that certificate of trust or that abstract of trust. So those are those 2 documents, if you will. So a couple other words that you should be aware about. This is a weird one, and I have to even look at it. It's called escheat. It is the reversion of property to the state in case there are no devisees, legatees, heirs, or next of kin. Again, same words for basically beneficiaries or heirs. That's the escheat. It goes back to the state at that point, and that's what we all want to avoid because, frankly, we don't want the state getting our assets or our money. So at the very bare minimum, if you don't have any kind of heirs or devisees, if you will, or if you don't have people that you want things to go to that they can't find, then put a charity in there. Put something that you are passionate about, or you want to help turd cats, you know what I mean, because you love them so much. I love you. Even though you get all my clothes covered in white fur. I love them. You know, you can do a cat rescue, you can do dogs, you could do ACLU, you could do your favorite political organization, you can do whatever you want, just as long as it goes somewhere, you know. Don't let the state take your money. You can always put somebody on there, and these organizations would love to have your money, and you can put your money and your assets where you felt passionate, and they will be happy to take that for you and to help fulfill more of your happy causes that you like. So don't let it to a sheet back to the estate, if you will. The other one is a big one, is called estate. Most of us don't think we have an estate. A lot of people don't think I have enough of an estate to create an estate plan or a trust or revocable living trust. Spoiler alert, 99.9% of everybody has an estate. That just means your stuff. You have stuff that if you weren't here needs to be transferred if you're not here to do so. That's called your estate. So it could just be as small as, you know, maybe you have a vehicle, maybe you have a bank account, maybe you then have a house, your primary residence, maybe you have an investment, if you will. That's your estate. You have stuff, you have wine collection, you have animals, that's your estate. So we all pretty much have an estate. Don't think it's because we have to have ponies, yachts, and chalets that we create a trust at that point or an estate plan. We all have an estate. So those are pretty much kind of some terms that you should be aware about. If you have other questions, or if you've come across a term that you don't understand or you need some clarification on, let me know. Or if you're going to go meet with an attorney's office or an estate planning practitioner, if you will, and you want to feel a little bit more education on that, of course, I have the webinar that you guys can look at my website, yourestateplan.online, that walks you through the whole process, kind of gives you more information on what those terms mean or how the process works, so you kind of have that basic education. Of course, I'll put in the show notes the download for the information on your estate plan, and of course we have that workbook as well to help walk you through those decisions. So whether you're doing an estate plan with me, which of course I prefer, but if you're not, going on your online doing it yourself, doing it for a different practitioner, or meeting with an attorney's office, it's always nice to download that workbook so you have a working knowledge of what they're going to ask you and what you're going to try to have to kind of come up with answers for. So of course, when you think of death, think of me. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you found value, please like, subscribe, and share. And be sure to follow me on all the socials at Sips and Tips with Lindsay. And of course, you can always go to my website, sipsandtipswithlindsay.com, to find more information about estate planning, business, snowboard, travel, and of course, wine. As always, we have to get the legal stuff out of the way. I went to law school, so you don't have to. However, we have to read the special disclaimer that I am not a practicing attorney. I am not your attorney. I am not offering any legal advice in any content or any episode. All content is for your information and educational purposes only. It is not a substitute for seeking your own legal advice from your own attorney or other professionals such as a CPA or financial advisor. I cannot give legal advice and do not offer any legal services or legal advice, but I do offer some fun and educational content for you to enjoy.